This is a video about a theory of knowledge called Lamarckism. Lamarckism is a false theory of biological evolution, and the structure of Lamarck's error continues to show up in art, appreciation, and relationships, and education, and everywhere else there is knowledge creation. This video will be a little bit technical, but also quite casual. I'm just sitting here drinking tea, and I'm reading a script. So if you're in for this, welcome. My name is Zachary. I'm interested to know what you think about Lamarckism. Please leave a comment if you have any interesting ideas on the subject. Lamarckism is a theory of knowledge. Specifically, it comes from biology as a theory of evolution, where Jean-Baptiste Lamarck hypothesized that acquired characteristics could be passed on to offspring. Here's a clip from Richard Dawkins describing Lamarckism.
Lamarck was the French naturalist predating Darwin who had a theory of evolution which was based upon the inheritance of acquired characteristics, and that's wrong. That doesn't happen, or almost certainly doesn't happen. Acquired characteristics, something that an animal learns, are not automatically incorporated in the genes. That would be Lamarckism.
To get more detailed, I'll list two important aspects of Lamarckism and give a more generalized translation so that it's more clear as a theory of knowledge. First, the production of a new organ in an animal results from a need in the environment that continues to be felt. Second, all that has been acquired or changed in the physiology of an individual during its life is preserved and transmitted to the next generation. Okay, so that's a pretty technical understanding of Lamarckism, and it's pretty close to what Lamarck understood himself. The most important problems of Lamarckism are a misunderstanding of where the knowledge is stored and in what form, while also implicitly placing some limit on how widely the knowledge can grow. So I'm going to list those two things into more natural language and split them into separate concepts, so it'll actually become a list of 4 things. The first is that internal knowledge is instructed by external knowledge in the environment. Second, knowledge growth will end once the external requirements are met. Third, knowledge, whether it's in genes or in behaviors or in acquired characteristics, that knowledge will be faithfully stored. And the final thing that's important for Lamarckism is that knowledge acquired as ideas and behaviors will be automatically transferred into genes, which could then be passed on to offspring. Each of these are major mistakes in biology, and they are equally mistakes in any other understanding of how knowledge grows. To see how this logic plays out, I'll describe the classic example. When a pre-giraffe looks at a tall tree, it sees the knowledge in the tree, the knowledge of how to reach the leaves. It sees the knowledge embodied in the environment. That knowledge is have a long neck to reach the leaves. That knowledge is then transferred to the giraffe, the pre-giraffe, by it stretching its neck. That stretched neck is knowledge, literally embodied as the body. That knowledge then is transferred to the genes, and the genes are passed on to its offspring. So there's no new knowledge in this situation. The knowledge was there all along. In Lamarckism, the idea of new knowledge is almost completely thrown out. What you have is knowledge already embodied in the environment, and that is transferred to the target. The knowledge in the organism can never go beyond the source knowledge, which is already embodied in the environment. With that picture in mind, let's go back through these 4 aspects of Lamarckism. I want to explain exactly why they're wrong, and give the contrast with Darwinian evolution, how Darwinian knowledge growth actually occurs. Then once the mechanism is clear, I'll show you a few examples of this error in action. All right, I'm going to read a little bit more, like more actually just reading the script so that I get this exactly right. Okay, first point of Lamarckism. Internal knowledge is instructed by external knowledge in the environment. Okay, the original phrase was a new organ, and that a new organ generalizes to internal knowledge. Okay, so we know today that organs are built based on DNA. So That's internal knowledge. That's what we mean by that. The original phrase also said a need from the environment, and that generalizes to external knowledge. A need from the environment is knowledge in the environment. That may sound a little weird, but it should sound weird because exterior knowledge is of a different form than our interior knowledge. They're not the same. You don't get exterior knowledge in DNA where your interior knowledge is actually DNA, right? So that's why the error of Lamarckism is common, because we don't have this distinction of understanding the difference between the external knowledge and the internal knowledge. You don't recognize those different types of knowledge, then you can't recognize the special mechanisms that are necessary to actually translate them. So if we go back to our pre-giraffe example, even if the environment did encode the knowledge that we need to stretch your neck in order to reach the leaves, it would need some special mechanism to translate that knowledge to DNA. And then it would need to have a specific mechanism to actually edit the DNA of the giraffe. But none of these mechanisms exist, so the whole logic falls apart. The actual process is Darwinian. So in Darwinian evolution, the external knowledge can never direct internal knowledge growth. There's no mechanism that notices a problem outside, right? If you have DNA sequences, nothing in the DNA looks out at the environment. There's nothing that notices a problem external or a need external. It just changes on its own due to random fluctuations, due to entropy, due to errors in replication. And when those things mutate blindly to the environment, then the ones that are good are they replicate more, and the ones that are not so good are killed. They die. That's the selection process. Okay, next point. Second aspect of Lamarckism: knowledge growth will end once the external requirements are met. So in the original phrasing, it was that there is a need from the environment which continues to be felt. So I'm saying that if the need continues to be felt, that means that when need is no longer felt, the knowledge growth stops. Lamarckism Lamarckism always has an endpoint for the growth of knowledge. And really, there's no room for creativity. Knowledge is just being transferred from the external source. And once that transfer is completed, the knowledge growth ends. So if this were the case, then there really would be no explanation for mistakes.
We don't make mistakes. We have happy accidents.
And also, knowledge growth will also be limited to the instruction from the environment. This would be tragic if this were the case, because people would have been permanently limited to the knowledge that was already present in the environment. But lucky for us, real knowledge growth is Darwinian. In Darwinian evolution, knowledge growth is constantly happening. There are mutations and variations that vary extremely frequently. And this happens in the genes without any foresight. Most are error corrected, but occasionally a mutation is better than the original. And if the variant is better than the original, that variant will replicate more widely. David Deutsch explains the difference between Darwinian evolution and Lamarckian evolution in this clip.
Biological evolution has no foresight. It can't see a problem and conjecture a solution. Whenever biological evolution produces a solution to something, it's always before natural selection has even begun. This is Charles Darwin's insight. This is the difference between Charles Darwin's theory of evolution and the other theories of evolution that had been around for a century or more before that, including Charles Darwin's grandfather and Lamarck.
As is made clear here, biological evolution is blind. Knowledge does not start growing due to any external knowledge or due to some external need. Knowledge cannot grow due to external instruction. Knowledge growth never stops because it is never directed. So there's no endpoint for Darwinian knowledge growth. Knowledge may grow beyond the limitations of your particular environment, because we're going beyond the knowledge that is already embodied in the environment. Okay, Third point about Lamarckism is very important here. Knowledge must be faithfully stored. In the original, it says, all that is acquired will be preserved. I'm just generalizing that to knowledge is faithfully stored. Lamarckism expects reliable, faithful storage of knowledge to an incredible degree. All changes in physiology are preserved. This reliable, faithful storage occurs passively with no reference to any mechanism to actually make that happen. It would be disastrous if every organism stored every defect and passed them on to the next generation. Injuries and genetic mistakes would just build up and overwhelm the system. See this clip from Richard Dawkins about injuries and the Lamarckism.
Injuries. My mother once had a dog who sometimes, like many small dogs, limped on 3 legs. And there was another dog in the village who had lost a leg in a car accident, and the owner of this 3-legged dog thought that her dog must be the father of our dog because he limped on 3 legs. That would be Lamarckism.
In Darwinian evolution, knowledge is not passively, faithfully stored. Knowledge only appears faithful due to active error correction mechanisms. The error correction mechanisms detect and correct changes due to entropy because they happen extremely frequently. DNA will mutate, but also behaviors change and bodies change and other aspects of the physiology and of the phenotype. All of these things, which are not stored in DNA, they change frequently. So the storage of knowledge in each of these are in constant flux. From the brain to the nervous system to memes and genes and so on, all of it is constantly changing. Darwinian evolution relies on natural selection as a filter. Instead of preserving every change, mistakes that failed to meet the standards of the environment are removed. That is the selection process. Okay, the fourth and final point for Lamarckism. Knowledge acquired as ideas and behaviors will automatically be transferred to genes, and of course, those will be passed on to the next generation. The original says that all that is acquired is transmitted to the next generation, so the generalization of that is pretty clear. I don't have to explain it too much. Lamarckism expects instant changes from one form of knowledge to another form of knowledge, but proposes no specialized mechanism for causing that change. The change from external knowledge to the form of internal knowledge is mirrored in this other form of changing between different internal types of knowledge. So like mental knowledge and behaviors and the state of the body and the DNA, these are all internal knowledge. However, they are not of the same form. One would need a special mechanism to turn mental knowledge into behaviors, and then turn the behaviors into bodily states, and then turn that bodily state into DNA. Without a direct translation mechanism, trial and error is the only way to make these changes. So let me clarify that a bit. To turn mental knowledge, which is an idea, into behavior is actually fairly easy for anyone who has some sort of basic bodily coordination. You can notice that children, when they're babies, they're trying to learn how to move their body. They have to go through this trial and error process. Of course, if you're an adult and you're learning a new behavior, like a totally new thing, you're going to have to go through this trial and error process, but it's usually quite easy. So that translation it works. It makes sense. It's easy to do, but it still involves trial and error. Okay, turning a behavior into a changed body is also quite difficult. You can imagine exercise, right? You have to exercise to turn your body into a fit body. Right? It takes time, it takes consistency, but the body is well prepared for this. It's already set up to cause, to change a stimuli and to do the things in the body that need to build muscle. That's already there. Turning bodily changes into DNA introduces a major difficulty. In fact, it is biologically impossible. There's no normal way for a person to modify their own DNA. Even with advances in gene editing technology, there's no clear way to change a particular gene sequence to cause a particular outcome. So we don't know which gene needs to be modified to create large muscles that you can get without needing to go to the gym. So if the knowledge is stored in your mind or in your behavior or in your body, it cannot be directly transferred to your genes. And thus, you cannot directly transfer it to your offsprings. So that is why Lamarckism is wrong. In Darwinian evolution, only the DNA is passed on to the next generation, and even that is error-prone. All other knowledge in the form of memes or physiology or other phenotypes, these all must be relearned from scratch every generation. If we look at the big picture, Lamarckism is fundamentally misunderstanding what form knowledge is stored in and how that knowledge changes. Lamarck did not have any notion of genes, nor did Darwin, for that matter. But without understanding the different forms of knowledge, he cannot understand how different forms of knowledge interact, or if they even do interact. This notion of instruction from without, it feels intuitive, but the Darwinian process of selection, that feels counterintuitive. Darwin's variation and selection is an entirely new and unfamiliar mode of evaluation introduced by Darwin. Knowledge does not come from outside. It cannot come from instruction. It must come from within. The knowledge inside it mutates or it guesses or otherwise it creatively varies. And then if you have errors, you remove those errors. You select against those errors. Even if the environment could change genes, which it cannot, it would have to know which specific genes to change to cause a specific effect. And that genetic coding is super messy and it's different for every species and it's different for every behavior. So the environment would have to have so much knowledge in order to actually specifically do that. You can't do it. It doesn't work. It doesn't happen. That sophisticated understanding of the genome is not present in the environment. Knowledge has no sources. We don't copy knowledge from a source. We recreate it within ourselves. New knowledge is genuinely the introduction of something new into reality. It can only happen given this Darwinian process of variation and selection, is what I've been calling trial and error. Knowledge does not automatically change into different forms. If knowledge is translated into a new form, let's say human theories are translated into DNA gene sequences or translated into code, if that does happen, the process of creating something new must happen through variation and selection. Knowledge is not faithfully stored. Knowledge is always in flux. There's always minor deviations which must be corrected. Because these errors are unpredictable, occasionally something that is created is better than the original, or they provide a pathway for something better. And that means that knowledge growth is constantly occurring. There's no endpoint for the growth of knowledge. And that is the case for all knowledge. Some knowledge can be creatively varied using attention. For human knowledge, theories can be deliberately varied. Like subsections of a theory or entire theory can be deliberately varied while the rest of it remains relatively stable. So you might say or think to yourself, I want to rapidly vary this portion of my theory, but keep everything else relatively consistent. It's as if we think, try more variations on this portion of the DNA strand and keep the rest of the DNA the same, and let's see what happens. Something like that. Even with this ability to direct our variations with human knowledge, the new knowledge that we get, we don't actually know what the outcome of that knowledge is going to be. That's kind of what it means to be new knowledge. So we're still at the mercy of trial and error. We have to try something new and see what works. Listen to David Deutsch explain the difference between human knowledge growth and biological knowledge growth.
Human new explanations evolve intentionally. They involve randomness at some level, but the business part of creating the new explanation is what happens to the randomness after it's generated. And it is changed and further changed intentionally to solve a problem. Every new genetic sequence is produced first and tried out later. So Lamarckism thinks that an organism's environment and its own actions can cause a change in its genome, and that can't happen, and it couldn't happen.
So is this also true within a mind? Like you have to make up something before you can tell whether it solves the problem or not.
Yes, but there's a difference, which is that the making up process isn't purely random.
Now that we have clarified the mechanism of Lamarckism, let's see how it plays out in our everyday life. For art, of course, this is my primary interest on this channel. Lamarckism shows up in many ways. The structure of having instruction from the environment is something that's very common. It can be either from the perspective of the creator, seeing beauty out in the world and creating a new work of art based on that beauty directly. That's one form of instruction from the external knowledge, and also from the perspective of the audience viewing a work of art and attempting to essentially absorb the data from the work of art. Like if you think that the artist has some personal emotion that they've encoded into a work of art, and that the audience is meant to just kind of receive it, it's like a data transfer directly to the audience. There's no real creativity going on here. There's no role for the audience to make something new or to see something new. It's really just the artist's intention as an authority. This is very similar to like if an artist thinks that they can observe life and then download the beauty of a situation. Like they're just representing life into their work without any specialized mechanism for actually translating it. And they expect people to understand it and see how there's knowledge in the world that's being translated to knowledge in a work of art without any proposed specialized mechanism for translating that. Of course, this comes to a hard endpoint. Even if you do have a mechanism, you're limiting yourself to only expressing things that have happened to a human, or expressing the emotions that a human has, or expressing particular situations that have happened in real life. If you're limited to a particular environment, it doesn't matter how big or small that environment is, you're limiting yourself to that environment, to the knowledge already embodied in that environment, to the beauty already embodied in that environment. All you have is a dead end. If art is Lamarckist, then we're just copying the world. We're not creating anything. Human creation has no relevance. I mean, there's not even a possibility for it. We may even think of something like an artist is tapping into some spirit world or tapping into a different dimension, and they're receiving things from there. The human has no role of creation. The human can only peer into some alternate dimension or something like that. Again, this is just denying the creativity of a human, and it is limiting what we can create. It's limiting the scope of our creation, the range of our creativity. So that's from the creative side. Of course, if it's Lamarckist from the appreciation side, then you don't even need to have an interpretation of anything. You just ask what the artist intended, and there you go. There's nothing more to appreciating a work of art. You don't need to feel it in any particular way. You don't need to see how it coordinates or coheres with your own personal experience. You don't have to think of new ways of finding resonances or seeing things in the work of art. You just download the PDF that the artist wrote about their work of art, and that's all you got. You need nothing else. In reality, art is Darwinian, from the creative side and from the appreciating side. The work of art is not a copy of emotions, nor a copy of just human situations, nor is it a copy of what the muses are telling you. The work of art is something new, and the appreciation of a work of art is also something new. And there's no limit to what you can create, how widely reaching your beauty can be in the works of art that you make. There's no limit to how deeply you can appreciate something. There's no limit to how well you understand a work of art. The depths of all of this is infinite. Creation has no endpoint, and there is no external source that you need to find as an authority to appreciate any works of art. The Lamarckist structure also shows up in things like relationships. It can be any coordination between multiple people. Right? This type of thing is quite, let's say, it's complex. Really, the complex part is where the knowledge is stored, right? If you have no understanding of where the knowledge is stored with between two other people, a different relationship or a different friendship or partnership, then that means you can't really use that to inform very well. You can't use that to inform your own relationships or partnerships or whatever. And the reason why you can't use it to inform, I mean, you can use it to inform, but what I mean is you can't just copy it. The problem is that you don't know where the knowledge is, right? Is the knowledge of the relationship, any partnership between two people or more people, is that knowledge stored in one person? Is it stored in multiple people? Is it stored in their bodies? Is it like extended into their bodies? Is it extended into their environment? Is it extended into their behavior? Where is it? Where is that knowledge stored? Really, that knowledge is distributed. So it's partially in the mind of a person, partially in their body, partially in the mind of the other person, partially in the environment that they're in. Like the knowledge of this relationship is distributed. So in order for somebody to have a smooth relationship that actually does, whatever you want a relationship to do, it's going to involve lots of different parts. So if an external viewer sees a relationship and wants to copy it, you don't know what to copy because the knowledge is so well distributed. You don't know what part of it is the relevant aspect to copy your life. So the only thing that you can do is trial and error. You just try certain things and see if it works. And you're going to have to try a lot of things because there are a lot of moving parts. Just by nature of you being different from the source, and also their relationship is going to be constantly changing, and you're going to be constantly changing. You can't really predict what changes in your life will be relevant and lead to superficially matching the structure of somebody else's relationship. So it makes for very error-prone and creative situations. There's no authority to follow. There's no possibility to copy any external source. And again, this is all knowledge. This is all knowledge creation. So there's no endpoint to how successful your relationship could be. I don't know what word I'm looking for here. But these things can grow and they can continue to grow and they should continue to flourish and grow with no endpoint in sight. If you were able to copy to think that you can copy somebody else's relationship or partnership or whatever, is Lamarckism. It's this error of not knowing where the knowledge is stored, not knowing how that knowledge is translated or if you can, and not knowing what to change in your life to match the knowledge that you're attempting to copy. The structure of Lamarckism shows up in all sorts of things about authority. As you can tell, the whole notion of having an external source, like, the environment embodying knowledge that you just copy, that in itself is like a form of authority. So you can see how that would, the structure, anything that has authority would be similar to Lamarckism in that form. So we can think of a few examples, like a school, education, where the teacher, of course, is the authority. They have the external knowledge, and they're attempting to drive the internal knowledge growth of a person, a kid usually. They want to pour their knowledge into the kid. They want to transfer directly their knowledge into the kid. Of course, really the only thing that kids learn from that is that they can't really grow their own knowledge unboundedly within themselves. They need an external source is what they learn, which is a false thing that they learn. It's impossible to force somebody to learn something because the teacher, let's say, does not have direct access to the neuronal connections in the student, right? The external source doesn't have direct access to the internal knowledge in itself. The tall tree doesn't have direct access to the giraffe's DNA. Remember external, internal knowledge? So the student also cannot directly change their own internal neural connections directly. I mean, we don't know how to do that, right? So you don't know how to change your neural connections directly to match the thing that you want to understand. And even if you could, you would need to already know what you need to understand before you can do it. It's all a complicated mess. You can't do this. the only option for learning is trial and error, which means that people need to make mistakes in order to learn something. They need to try something new, and then they can match and see if it. They need to try something new, and then they can see if it has implications, and if those implications match the standards of the thing that they're trying to actually understand. And then on top of that, it gets even more of an issue. Lamarckism expects faithful storage of information, whereas Darwinian knowledge growth recognizes that things are error prone, things are going to mutate pretty much constantly. You got to have very robust error correction systems to make sure that things stay somewhat stable. So even if a student creates the right information in their mind at a particular time, that information, that knowledge is going to drift and change. It's always going to be in flux. So things are going to be forgotten and misremembered. Let's say if somebody is annoyed, like a teacher is annoyed with having to repeat themselves often, they're making a mistake. They're making a Lamarckist mistake, pretty much. They're expecting that people understand and remember everything that they've ever spoken, but it's impossible. Students will not keep a 100% accurate record of every interaction that they have with a teacher. Any internal knowledge will not keep a 100% accurate record of everything in the past that it has ever had. I feel like I said that in a weird way, and I don't even know if it made sense, but I think you understand what I mean. You can't have 100% faithful, accurate storage of all information. That would be Lamarckism, be Lamarckist. We have constant deviations, but it also means the possibility of constant improvement. David Deutsch recently tweeted out an interesting definition of school. He says, school, it's a verb, to make someone regret disobeying. That was kind of funny. It highlights this lack of creativity in school, right? This attempt to force instruction from external sources. You need to obey. However, it should be clear that progress means to do something differently. And if you want to progress, you have to do something different. So that means you have to disobey in order to progress. Anyway, I'm going in too much detail to that. That's a whole different topic that can be fleshed out much more. You could also have problems with instruction from the past, similar types of thing. You're just trying to copy behaviors from the past or copy ideas from the past. Let's say you're copying moral behaviors from the past. People like, for example, you might have a book that tells you to tithe. You might want to tithe 10% or 20% or 25% or whatever the heck. Why? Why one number over a different number? Why would you follow the advice of somebody who wrote something, even if it's a lot of people who wrote something, even if it's really smart people who wrote something? Why would you follow the advice of somebody from 3,000 years ago who is in an entirely different situation of knowledge and society and so on? Their lives are completely different. And you want that to somehow inform how you should be living your life today with a modern tax system, with modern society, healthcare, and so on. The beauties of modern life, totally different from life 100 years ago, let alone 3,000 years ago. The behavioral commands of people from 3,000 years ago probably mean almost nothing. I mean, pretty much, they mean just absolutely nothing today. It's an error to follow those or attempt to follow those. And the error is Lamarckist error, is this misunderstanding of where the knowledge is, what knowledge is being translated. You get what I'm saying. Similar type of thing from instruction from governments, right? Attempting to control the behaviors or flow of money without understanding where that specific knowledge is. Like, what is it that controls the behavior? I don't know. Expecting spirit realms to have perfect knowledge that we must try to match, like trying to read the Akashic records. We're trying to reach into the forms or remember the forms or whatever that's about, talking to the muses. This is attempting to find knowledge that's already encoded in some other environment and copy it. It's Lamarckist. You don't need instruction from the environment. We can create knowledge ourselves. You don't need to tap into some other world for scientific or artistic achievements. You are a human being and you can create knowledge yourself. Some forms of naive empiricism are kind of similar to this also. The whole idea that you can use your senses as a window into the world and absorb the knowledge from there. Right? More observations to absorb knowledge or something of that nature. It follows this Lamarckist idea that the environment instructs the organism. External knowledge instructs your internal knowledge, right? The universe is a book written in the language of mathematics. It's a quote from Galileo. I say quote, but I translated it, obviously. It's a translated quote. I didn't translate it. It's a quote from Galileo, okay? But again, this just kind of erases it erases creativity. In that case, it didn't erase creativity because he didn't really have the conception of it properly formulated as we do now. We have the idea of creativity. We understand that humans have the capability to create new things, new theories, new mathematics, new scientific theories, new artistic theories. We have this, like, we understand this now. We don't need to copy the ideas from the environment. The same thing comes from like emotions. Some people think about emotions in a kind of Lamarckist type of way, which is a bit strange, I think. And I didn't even notice it for a long while, and only recently I was talking to a friend about something, Pluribus, the TV show. I was talking to a friend about this, and something just struck me as like in very Lamarckist. Like it's just like very bizarre. I'll get into. Okay, emotions, they're a construct. They're a construct. Emotions are not like primitive things in nature that we have absorbed or copied or figured out. I don't even know how to describe this properly. They're not some things out there in the world that we stumble upon. They're things that are created. They're created partially, of course, by biology, biological evolution, I mean. They're partially created, of course, by human culture, right? But these are creations, and they are not perfect creations. They're things that can be improved upon. So we can make better emotions. We can make better motivations for doing things, or better experiences or feelings directly. We can make better ones. There's no reason to find like the pinnacle of contentment and consider that to be some end point. It's not like we find happiness or we find contentment and then we're like, done, progress finished. We don't need to progress anymore. As if the goal of life was to discover happiness or contentment and then be finished. We created it. It was created by biology or human culture. Life did not. We're not like finding something in reality and picking it, and that's like, oh, this is our endpoint of all of life. This is what we needed to get to and be done. We needed to find happiness and then stop progress. No, we created happiness. We created the emotion. Like biology and humans together, we've done this. We've made this thing, and we can make more better things. Right? If you believe that an emotion, any of them, are like some primitive things that can't be improved, that are some sort of gift from nature, that's Lamarckist. It's Lamarckist in that you have an endpoint. It's Lamarckist in that you have this sort of external reality that is giving you the knowledge. It's instructing what you can do. It's completely ignoring the creativity of humans or biology. Biology too. We're cool with biology. Me and biology, bro, we're cool. We shouldn't just be happy and die. We create these lovely emotions, and we can create even better ones. There's no end point. Okay, anyway. I'm kind of going off track here. All right. Drinking a little tea. You know this. With these examples clarified, you can now see a lot of ways in which Lamarckism shows up, the structure of Lamarckism shows up. You might find Lamarckism in your own life. And hopefully you can see the alternative, which is Darwinian evolution, trial and error, conjecture criticism, variation selection. You can see how to rethink the way that you're doing your problem solving or knowledge creation. Okay, please tell me what you think. I'm interested. I know it started a little bit technical and it got a little bit more casual and weird. Whatever, we have fun with it, okay? Tell me if you have any ideas here, either from the technical side or from the less, more casual side, the more weird side. I don't know. If you think of anything, if you found anything I said was interesting, just let me know. Leave me in the comments. And I'd love to know if you think I've said anything wrong or if you've got more extensions of what I've said, just give me something.